Welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home, digital citizenship supported by Media Smarts and Meta. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and tonight I'll also be your host and moderator. And we're really excited to be joining you online and across the country and around the world on the first annual Digital Citizenship Day. And this is happening during the 17th annual Media Literacy Week. So digital citizenship, what does it mean to be a digital citizen, and media literacy, these will be themes that you'll find throughout the evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices at the Walrus and where I am right now are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are honored to contribute to a tradition of storytelling, and we encourage you to take a moment wherever you are joining us from tonight to reflect on the land that you're on. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't done so, or if you haven't done so recently, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we'll be sure to put that in chat right now. Now, a little bit about the Walrus. The Walrus, we like to say we're Canada's conversation, and we are committed to that. Challenging, urgent, complex, and thoughtful conversations. And we do this in a number of different ways. We're best known for our journalism, and this is hot off the press. I say hot, meaning it just showed up in our office. This is our December issue, The Air We Share. It's on COVID-19 and building design and the air in those spaces. But also you can find our journalism online at thewalrus.ca. We also have conversations through our podcast and in our event series, which are in person and online, like this one, the Walrus Talks at Home. And this work is powered by our donors, our supporters, our partners. So thank you all for being here and being a part of it, and especially to Media Smarts and Meta for making this conversation possible. I'd now like to invite Debbie Reid, Indigenous Policy Manager at Meta, to share some opening remarks. Hi, Debbie, nice to see you.
And you as well, Jen. Thank you very much for inviting me. I want to first acknowledge Jen's acknowledgement as a First Nations person. It's always very important to hear Canadians, fellow Canadians, acknowledge where they are. So thank you, Jen, for that. And I want to say thank you to the Walrus for hosting tonight's virtual talk, and to our partners, Media Smarts, and to all of the speakers. Digital media literacy is an absolutely essential skill for today's world. And we're so thrilled to see this group of experts apply themselves to this issue. We all know that there's no silver bullet to fight misinformation. That's why we need a multi-pronged approach from platforms like Meta and from people. At Meta, that means a three-part framework: remove, reduce, and inform. Meta has built the largest global fact-checking network for any platform, with more than 90 fact-checking partners around the globe who review and rate viral misinformation. In Q2 of 2022, we displayed fact-checking warnings on over 2 million distinct pieces of content on Facebook globally, based on over 130,000 debunking articles written by our fact-checking partners. We also have more than 40,000 people working on safety and security, available 24/7 across the globe in over 50 languages. Alongside artificial intelligence, which can detect violations on Facebook and Instagram, we have trained human reviewers to deploy to train our AI and to deal with more nuanced matters. When we find content or profiles that violate our community standards, we remove it. Clear and simple. But we all know there are pieces of content that fall into the gray area. And that with the pace of misinformation and the spread of it, we all need to do our part. We also know there's no playbook for a program like ours. And so we're constantly working to improve it. We applaud work by Media Smarts and other groups to help citizens people do their bit too, educating on how to identify misinformation, how to be aware of traps, and how to respond to it, including working with the tools that different platforms provide. As an Indigenous person, this is truly so important to me. Indigenous people are one of the biggest targets in Canada for misinformation and online hate. But as Jen talked about the 94 calls to action, becoming aware, becoming informed, and being part of the solution of fighting misinformation is so important to making sure that conversations are real, authentic, and are not led by misinformation or hate. By working together, we think we can truly make the digital world better. And that's why we're thrilled to sponsor tonight's talk and partner with Media Smarts for their first annual Digital Citizenship Day and their 17th annual Media Literacy Week. Thank you so much for participating. And thank you again to the speakers and to the Walrus. Back to you, Jen.
Thanks, Debbie. Yes, digital citizenship. That's what we're going to look at tonight and what it means to be a digital citizen. I think we can all agree we do a lot of this. We're on our screens more than ever, especially during the pandemic, but we are just connecting in new ways every day. And this is an opportunity tonight to reflect on what we're doing online in terms of our behavior, but also who has access and agency across the online landscape. And as our relationship with technology and our online relationships with each other evolve, what can we do as individuals, but also collectively to ultimately create a better digital world? So here's how tonight works. Each speaker has 5 minutes live, and once our heads are full with new ideas, we'll have a moderated Q&A session with our talkers and your audience at home. So we encourage you at any point, submit your questions if you're watching on Zoom in the chat, or if you're on Facebook Live in the comments, and I will try to get to as many as I can. We also, and I'm going to say this, encourage you to share this conversation on social media. So feel free to take a picture of how you're watching us and tag us at the Walrus on any of the platforms, or if there's something you hear that you'd like to share or some feedback or comments that you'd like to put out there, use our hashtag Walrus Talks. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Cadar Brisson-Boivin, Director of Research at Media Smarts, Alexander Dirksen, Community Builder and Writer, Cadar Mohamud, Founder and CEO of the Digital Sisterhood. Thanks again to everyone who's tuning in tonight. And we're going to kick things off with Cadar Brisson-Boivin. Welcome, over to you.
My name is Cadar Brisson-Boivin, and I'm the Director of Research at Media Smarts. This week is Media Literacy Week, and today marks the first annual Digital Citizen Day. It's a time where we can pause and reflect on what it means to participate and engage online. Our digitally connected world is constantly changing how we learn, work, play, explore, and interact with each other. If we are to safely exercise our online agency, we need to develop the skills and habits of digital media literacy, to access devices in order to use and consume media and navigate digital networks, to use digital and media tools like cameras, software, and online platforms, and to understand and think critically about how and why media are made, examining the impacts on us and society, as well as to engage with media to participate in our communities and express ourselves ethically and responsibly. Digital media literacy is something that we need to actively exercise and constantly develop, requiring lifelong learning support. Likewise, digital citizenship cannot be reduced to being on our best behavior. Being online can afford us many opportunities and privileges, but it also requires that we are accountable and responsible for our actions and inactions. While our online experiences or encounters are felt in all spaces, both online and offline, how we behave and interact online is not necessarily the same as how we behave and interact offline. Our online experiences and environments shape our capacity to develop empathy and to act ethically. Aspects of digital communication can lead to empathy traps, which can prevent us from feeling empathy in situations where we normally would. When we're using the same screen to talk to our friends that we use to watch House of Dragons, and when we can't see the person we're hurting or copying from, it can be easy to forget that what we do online matters. A lack of sensory feedback can make us less likely to recognize how other people are feeling when we're online. Some of the things that would generally trigger empathy in us, a person's tone of voice, their body language, their facial expression, this can be absent when we interact with them online, and it can lead us to say or do things that we wouldn't normally do offline. Similarly, new and ever-evolving technologies like algorithms and artificial intelligence impact our ability to recognize and respond to harmful things like bias and prejudice. In fact, there's significant research on how online platforms amplify inequities and online harms for more views, engagements, and ultimately more profits. And users don't have to encounter overt hate speech to be exposed to hate online. Much more common are cultures of hatred, communities in which racism, misogyny, and other forms of prejudice are normalized. Not everyone experiences the internet in the same way. Many people that are racialized, gender and sexually diverse, living with a disability, or who identify as female, actively disengage from online spaces and avoid online interactions due to safety and well-being concerns. We also can't assume that everyone has equal access to the internet and digital devices. Increasingly, businesses, services, and even democratic processes have migrated online, and citizens who lack digital media literacy skills risk being disadvantaged when it comes to accessing healthcare, government services, and opportunities for education, employment, and civic participation. Access is the critical starting point for developing digital literacy skills necessary for ethical digital citizenship and online agency. So we're back to this new and evolving idea of digital citizenship. What does it mean to be an ethical digital citizen? What are our responsibilities to each other? Well, the core or founding principle of digital media is that they are networked or connected. Everything and everyone online is connected to everyone else. The internet is not a silo, nor is it a vacuum. We are attached to each other, quite literally in the online sense, in this infinite web of nodes and connections, and that connection comes with responsibility. It warrants that we pause before we share something, check the sources of our information, intervene and report in situations of online abuse, racism, and sexism, and use our collective power to hold platforms and governments accountable for addressing our online safety, equity, and privacy concerns. To paraphrase the work of Eliza Kelly, assistant professor at Yale University, digital citizenship is different from the kind of citizenship that needs authorization or is tied to a governing or ruling body. We have the opportunity to retool citizenship in the online or digital context by working together to build and support collective online resilience. Our hope is that on this first Digital Citizen Day, we can each take a moment to reflect on the many ships that make up digital citizenship, including relationship, friendship, companionship, leadership, mentorship, stewardship, allyship, and partnership. These are the ships that make up the kind of ethical digital citizenship that we imagine can navigate us through difficult digital landscapes. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Alexander Dirksen, and it's a real privilege to be with you. I'm a proud member of Métis Nation BC, and I've written on digital rights and citizenship as it relates to reconciliation and decolonization. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation and pay my respect to elders past and present. I recognize a continued connection to country that has existed since time immemorial, and that sovereignty of these lands and waterways was never ceded. As we gather for a conversation on digital citizenship, this recognition, this grounding is so critical. Digital spaces can feel abstract, but we cannot lose connection with where our feet touch the ground and the responsibilities and relationships that flow from this. And it's from this place that I'd like to share my opening reflections. For I believe that we cannot separate people from platforms or physical places from digital domains. And when we attempt to do so, the erasure that occurs through the myth-making of technology as a neutral or altruistic force perpetuates and reinforces the very systems that seek to divide us and enables tech monopolies to extract and exploit for capitalist gain. Behind every app and every device are people who bring their positionality and the systems they operate within into the lines of code that power our digital lives. When we think of digital spaces in this way, we can begin to see the connections between what is experienced online and what we see in the streets. The targeting of Indigenous and racialized communities through digital surveillance in an age where technology companies have failed to meaningfully confront hate speech online can be more deeply understood within the context of the world around us, where land defenders are met with police brutality, while far-right anti-vaxxers can roam the streets of the capital. In this way, being a good digital citizen is a modern expression of a form of connection and community that stretches back through time. With citizenship comes an understanding that we inherently share a set of values and priorities that guide us in how we carry ourselves in this world. It is rooted in recognition of our interconnectedness, that our strength comes not through individual action, but through collective care. And it asks for an awareness of the needs, aspirations, and offerings of those around us. Coming from this place, it is my hope that we can begin to reflect more deeply upon our individual and collective roles and responsibilities as citizens in all forms, increasing our awareness and understanding, leveraging our privileges and platforms, and advocating for and enacting change. These acts are at the heart of transformative social justice. So many aspects of our lives are governed by antiquated systems rooted in racism and prejudice, and the digital domain is no different. What exists before us is an opportunity to reimagine our world, from places to pixels, to reflect the values we hold and the diversity of our communities that is our greatest strength. As Kara touched upon in her opening reflections, there exists both incredible promise, but also significant work to be done if we are to realize this opportunity. As it relates to crafting digital spaces rooted in justice and equity for all, we must confront and address pervasive and persistent injustices and inequities, beginning with the digital divide that have carried over and on from our physical world. We must center, amplify, and resource diverse community voices and perspectives within key decision-making and leadership roles, acknowledging that just as technology is far from a neutral force, power and privilege manifest in the boardrooms and offices of those at the forefront of our digital age, and produce far from equal footing for all to have a voice. And lastly, we must meaningfully reckon with the reality of our digital age. As large tech monopolies come to have a reach and revenue far beyond colonial borders, and at times far larger than some colonial states, our laws and regulations must respond accordingly. I look forward to listening and learning alongside my incredible panelists here today as we explore this opportunity together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Walrus for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here with all of you. My name is Cadar Mohamud. I am the founder and host of the Digital Sisterhood, a digital storytelling platform and podcast. My podcast has reached over 5 million downloads in over 63 countries. Most recently, we were charting in top podcasts around the world, and in the UK and Canada, Digital Story Podcast was number 2, beating respected podcasts, big budgeted podcasts like The Joe Rogan Experience, The Archetype by Meghan Markle, Call Her Daddy by Alex Cooper, and many more popular podcasts. And I did this all from the comfort of my own room. On my podcast, I tell stories about Muslim women to counter the pre-existing narratives of what it means to be a Muslim woman. Growing up, I had a really difficult time with my identity. Although I was a born Canadian and the eldest daughter of a proud immigrant household or parents, I never felt like I went outside and felt like I belonged. Either I struggled with my Blackness or struggled with my Muslim identity or struggled being a woman. I never could see all of my intersecting identities in one place. So in high school, I was a wallflower. If you ask my mom, she'll tell you that I spent my entire life and probably the most popular career blending into her wallpaper at home. But when I got to high school, it was the very first time that I was challenged. Very first time I felt like somebody actually saw me. And that was my teacher, Glenda. Glenda was his vivacious, redheaded drama teacher, loved telling stories, but I always felt like she loved just picking on me mostly. When I started, I signed up to join band class because I believed that band class would be good enough that I wouldn't stand out, because if I made a noise, if I made the wrong note on my trumpet, who wouldn't even notice? But in drama class, there's only one spotlight and just you. I wasn't trying to have that. And as life had it, I ended up in drama class, and I ended up trying to fight my way out of it. So a teacher told the drama teacher that I was trying to get out of her class. She was persistent having me in just because. And so I had to go to this drama class, and it was just the most intense class ever. And it was really out of a horror film. Like for me as a wallflower, seeing a spotlight, a dark robe, and so many students, I knew I was either going to have a panic attack or I was somehow going to survive blending into the darkness of those rooms. But Glenda had an eye on me. On my very first day of class, she called me out in front of everyone. I remember thinking, there's no way that she's calling me. There's so many people in this room. Why is she choosing me? She said, hey, Adar, can you come? I would like you to read this poem. So I awkwardly get up. I go underneath the spotlight and I start reading. And instantly I started stuttering. For the first time, I felt like I could see my whole life flashing before my eyes. Not to be dramatic, but by my exit, and I exited out of the room very dramatically, I probably could have been a great actress if I decided to keep up with it. I exited the room crying, having a full-blown panic attack. And my trauma teacher, Glenda, runs after me and she says, Adar, first, just breathe in and out. She breathes in with me and out with me. And she says to me, I don't understand why you choose to be the side character of your own movie when you're clearly intended to be the main character. For the very first time, it was so daunting. It was kind of an interesting experience to feel like somebody had looked at me and said, hey, listen, you can't live this way. You can't live like a wallflower. You can't just blend in. You can't just try to disappear. No matter how much you want to delete your life, that's not possible. You only have one option. Either you're going to flourish or you're going to just stand there. You're still going to exist. And that was the very first time I had realized that I had to look inward. Another experience I had that I felt like was really powerful was the first time I had read a book by Toni Morrison called The Bluest Eye, which talked about the experience of a character who was having trouble with her Blackness. That was the very first time that I had actually read something that felt like was reflective of my experience. And I remember thinking, wow, how many more books are out there like this? For the first time, I felt like I was seen. For the first time, I felt like something was addressed that I couldn't quite understand. And then after that, I kept thinking, what else is out there? Is there more characters? Are there stories out there that I just don't know of? But at the time, all I ever saw were stories and movies about characters I just didn't relate to. I tried, no matter how hard I tried, to relate to them. I always felt like maybe it's just something wrong with me. Maybe I just don't stand out. Maybe I'm just never meant to be anybody. And those really harmful notions really, really impacted me. I can only imagine how many other people it impacted. But when I graduated from high school, I had decided I was going to change that. After sticking to drama class for all 4 years of high school, I was like, that's it for me. I could do this. And since then, I had started a podcast called Digital Sisterhood. But the first debut project was our podcast to tell stories about Muslim women. So women can imagine themselves as characters, to imagine their stories as beautiful and powerful, and to see ourselves as universal. So much media says that we're not, that we're outsiders. In reality, our stories are more alike than we are different. I'm going to prove that. I started a podcast from my bedroom, and now it's all over the world with 5 million listeners. That is what's possible if we just tell our stories and we own them and we voice them, we use the voices that we have and use technology in the way that we should to impact and create true change. Thank you.
Thank you, Adar. I'm a fan. Thank you as well to Alexander and Kara. All right, we're excited to open up this conversation to our audience at home. Happy Digital Citizen Day. I like with new days of significance, creating greetings like that. So hope you're having a good one. And I'm curious, want to know where you're joining us from today. Let us know. Let's see. Okay, we have Yellowknife, Chelsea, Sackville. We have folks tuning in from, wow, cities in Iran, Nigeria, Australia. Amazing. I mean, that's the thing for me that never gets old as someone who has lived through many different stages and generations of technology is for us to all be here together in so many different locations. Now, a reminder, my job is to ask your questions. So I have a few to kick us off. But if you have a question for any of our talkers tonight, based on what they've just shared, or even questions at large on what it means to be a digital citizen or digital citizenship, please just ask it in the comments or chat. Now, I'd like to welcome back our talkers to the main stage, and we'll get right into it. Excellent. Kara, you said in your talk that connection comes with responsibility. And I'd like to begin there, and I'll throw this to you. What does that idea of responsibility mean in what we're doing on digital? Because I have to say, even when you said it like that, I don't know how often I think about being responsible, even though I do identify as a citizen.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, and again, like what we want to raise awareness or bring attention to today is the real relational aspect of our technology use. So I think responsibility, requires that we take the moment to remind ourselves that we are engaging with other people online. There is another person at the other side of that comment, that post, that, engagement that we're having. Because as my colleagues on the panel have said as well, it can be easy when we are in these online interfaces that can feel somewhat removed to forget that. We have some of the benefits of the things I mentioned, on a Zoom call where you can see me gesturing and you can, get a sense of my body language. But that's not the case sometimes when we're, playing a video game or, writing a comment on a news article. So I would say, first and foremost, it's that relational aspect. There are other aspects around the way in which we, share information. I mentioned, the importance of pausing to check the source of a piece of information, to take some time, to move beyond reading a thumbnail or a caption over an image, and do some homework to really verify that source, especially when the consequences of sharing that information online are such that it has the potential to reach millions of people. We do need to remind ourselves, like if you're on a social network, you do whether you think it's possible or not, just by virtue of being in that space, you have the potential to reach millions
Even
of
if you
other
have a few
people.
followers, right? Like
That's
I think
right.
that's what
Yeah.
people
I
forget.
mean,
Even if you just have a few hundred followers, you still could.
that's right. And I say it all the time, we like to joke about it, but it is true. Like, we could go viral tomorrow, and you think never, never, but you really could. And
I hear
because of
Cadar
that,
laughing because this is what has happened to her.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so because of that, especially when it comes to things that have, consequences for people's political decision making or our public health, like we really do have a responsibility to pause and check before we share that content. So those are two pieces I would say there.
Alexander, I'd love to hear your thoughts because you touched on that in your talk as well, which is, there's the community and systems that we're a part of made up of us.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to lose sight of the individuals behind the platforms. I think when we are inhabiting digital spaces, and I think when we lose that personal connection or that awareness of that personal connection, as Cara spoke to in her opening remarks, I think we lose those human connection points and those touch points that I think are really integral to us moving forward in a really thoughtful way. I think digital spaces can, as I said, seem very neutral, seem as though they are a different space, as if somehow we leave behind all the bias and prejudice and knowledge gaps that we hold in our day-to-day lives, that when we sort of log into Instagram or check the news online, that somehow that's not going to show up. And I think it's really important for us to not lose that grounding and connection back to, there are people behind the screens, there's people behind the lines of code, and that at the end of the day, this is where for me, when I think about thoughtful digital citizenship, it really begins with some of that personal work at that human to human level and connection point. And I think that's where we really need to begin if we're going to move forward with digital citizenship in a really thoughtful way.
There's this expression I think we've all used or heard, which is in real life, suggesting the physical, suggesting off Zoom, off social media. This is real life, right? Like this is the same life, more and more probably. This is even realer life. And Cadar, I'd love to hear your thoughts as, someone like so many podcasts, like doing this, at home in community and really connecting with people and now becoming beyond viral, just a huge success. What does responsibility mean to you in your work, whether it's as a founder or as a host, or even as someone like, I know you're also very popular on TikTok as well, right?
Yeah. It's interesting for me when I started the podcast during the pandemic, where all I had to do was kind of imagine these people behind, listening. And I had the privilege of going on tour this summer and seeing the listeners in person and just touching them and hugging them and speaking to them and seeing what it's done on the other side of it really, really sprung me into like shock of like, oh my God, like everything that I say, they're saying back and they're holding it. They're not more than just listening. They're using it for their life. They're applying it. They're sharing it. The sharing is the part that's really so intense, to know that somebody might be moved or is so touched by a story that they share with others and it impacts their lives positively. How many women have come to me and told me, I've decided to stop doing this or stop doing that because of the episode that you shared. I've decided to consider looking at my mother differently and start thinking about her mental health. I never considered my mom as human until I heard the story about Hannah. And it was then I realized that all the stories have a placement somewhere. And these are real people's lives, and the stories and the people listening on the side are also being affected. And so it really put me into like, what do I want to say to the world? If everyone is listening, what do I want to say? And am I going to stand by what I say? I can't unsay those things. These are the things I put out. I have to be really, really careful, but they're really, really important. And it's beautiful to see what, sharing and telling stories can do for others in their personal lives is truly incredible.
Mm-hmm. A follow-up question that's just come in chat, and Cara, I'd love to throw it to you from Catherine. How much responsibility do the platforms hold in the project of digital citizenship?
Yeah, I think there's a role certainly for platforms as well as for, governments or regulators. I think as far as platforms go, there's a lot of work that can be done at that level to help build architectures that would support and facilitate our capacity as users to engage as digital citizens. So one example, I spoke about, the online hate and prejudice that is running rampant in all kinds of online communities. And I don't mean just the sort of difficult to access, deep internet spaces. I mean the spaces that we are all engaging on, all the social platforms. And one of the things that our research has found is that reporting is a real challenge. It's difficult to understand how to report. The codes of conduct and behavior on online platforms need to be very clear, easy to understand. And so aside from the codes of conduct and reporting needing to be accessible, users also want to know that there is enforcement happening. What is happening once I make a report? We've heard very often that it feels like reporting is shouting into the void. I think it would signal enforcement measures on the part of platforms would signal to users in those spaces that these, are not, these kinds of abuses of the codes of conduct are not accepted, and this is what is, going to happen if they are infringed upon. And I think, it's also, important to keep in mind, as Alexander mentioned in his comments, that they also have a role to play in terms of the design of the spaces that we are engaging on. Thinking about our mindful uses of these platforms, so that the architecture of the space is not such that I am just mindlessly scrolling through content, but I am actively and positively engaging in a space for genuine social connection, or maybe to move my body around, or something that brings me real benefit. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that regard too. And I guess lastly, I would just say, just echo Alexander, comment and around who's at the table in making these design decisions, because we know that equity by design, starts with the folks around that table, and there's a lot of work to be done there, as in terms of bringing women and racialized folk and gender and sexually diverse persons to a table to build technology that represents and reflects those experiences, like Adar has been talking about tonight as well.
Yeah, I remember one of our previous talkers highlighted some of the work that activists do with Wikipedia, which is getting a group of women in a room together to like update Wikipedia on science, right? Because even though Wikipedia seems open to anyone, still mainly men who are actually getting in and making those changes. Alexander, I want to bring you back in regards to the collective. I think online at its best feels like community, and often you can find people that maybe you can't find as neighbors or at work. So how do we tap into that collective care at a time where we're just seeing the rise of rugged individualism, both in person in society, but also online in these spaces?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we're seeing it as we continue to move through the pandemic, right? I think incredible podcast platforms that connect people around the world, for example. There is such potential and power there. I think we're also interacting with and using platforms that really put the centering and priority on the individual experience, right? It's about your individual followers, the number of tweets and retweets and likes. So we're I think moving into these spaces with a desire to connect and the desire to transcend colonial borders or transcend distance, but we're coming up against at the end of the day platforms that are designed within the bounds of capitalism, and that these large tech companies have profit incentives that drive the design decisions of these platforms. I think it's really up to us as individuals to be aware of that first and foremost, and to really push back on that wherever we can. And I think that's where storytelling initiatives, coming together in these types of spaces through Zoom for dialogue and connecting around shared areas of interest or ideas, I think is really critical, because I think we have to really counter that ability for us to be very quickly siloed into either bubbles or spaces of complete misinformation. And I think that really comes through when we actually find those avenues that sort of resist the capitalist pressures that we find in digital spaces, and really use digital spaces to do to thoughtfully do what we try to do in person, which is to connect with each other. And when we can do that, I think that's when digital spaces are their most effective and their most powerful.
Cadar, I want to bring you in because, I mean, just the title, Digital Sisterhood, that was a choice to call it that. So we'd love to hear how you went from being someone with an idea to like now competing with all these big, big brands, big funds, very big platforms in the podcasting world. It's not easy what you've done. I mean, you make it look easy, but it's a huge accomplishment.
No, it definitely was not easy. I didn't have the budgets. I didn't have the big marketing teams. I didn't have the sponsorships. I didn't have the infrastructure. Sometimes I didn't even have the equipment. Sometimes all I had was me and my friends to, help me make this possible. But in that journey, I found so many women and even men who wanted to support and amplify the stories I was telling, because these are stories that don't often get airtime. And when they don't get airtime, so many of us are excluded. And if women like me are excluded from the conversation, then who's telling our stories? What narrative is out there, right? And so there's this real need for women, for us to take it back. And the way that we take it back is there on my LinkedIn page, you look at it, it says, what do you do? I literally say, I just share with them, I share the mic with as many women as possible. That's literally what I do. I wouldn't even say I tell them, I just hand the mic to other women to tell me, what is it that you want to tell the world? What is real? What isn't? What's truthful? What's your truth? And so having that and seeing where it's taking, because I would literally say, this community has carried me. I don't even know how I got here, but since I started, I made the first step. It was like every other step was ready for me to take, because no one was letting me just stay silent. No one was just not going to let me not do the work anymore, because that's how important it was. That's how necessary it was. And so I'm just happy to do it. I'm happy to be the voice. I'm happy to take care of the needs of those guests I bring on. They're also very important. And how I tell the stories is so integral about the way that we do it. How many of our stories have been told, but done in such a really terrible way, right? And so there's also this care and respect and this cultural nuances that, I've been very lucky to have background on. And so it just works out that I'm probably the best person for the job. I didn't even realize it, but I was the best person for the job because I was Black, because I was a Muslim, and because I was a woman, because I was so integrated with such strong intersectionals that I could empathize with a lot of women, and so, yeah, it's been a ride.
Yeah, you are the perfect person for the job. We have a lot of audience questions coming in, so I want to get to as many as possible. This is from John. What is the single most important thing that can be done to deal with bad digital citizenship? And I love this idea, right? Because we're all citizens in the world, and there's bad behaviors. I think of someone throwing litter and being like, oh, someone else can pick it up. So I would love to know, Kara, what can be done there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question. We know, from some work, especially around mis and disinformation, that the shame approach doesn't always work that well. It can shut people down if we are, labeling or that kind of behavior. But I think it just, again, signals the importance of the kind of multi-layered approach to digital citizenship. Are we talking about calling out, your uncle because, he posted a picture of you without your consent and you look goofy, that's one kind of layer or level. But when we're talking about the, again, feeling of safety and security, and whether or not everybody feels like they can participate and engage online, I think we've moved beyond kind of bad digital citizenship into some of the, one of the things that our, online world does is it reflects the social problems of our world to us in a different, medium. And so I think we have to, approach the problem similarly. It's not as I think you said in the or Debbie said, there isn't a silver bullet, and it's going to take, it takes all of us doing, or having that, concerted effort, as others have said, to kind of think, reflect, and think about, the kind of, it sounds cheesy, but the kind of online world that we do want, to have and to pass along to others. So yeah, I think it's, there's a spectrum in which, we can engage and interact at an individual level. And of course that we need, I think broader sort of social structural interventions. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, well, our next question, Adar, I'm going to send it your way. This is from Jonah. Do you believe there should be more media literacy classes for high school and middle school students? And I send it this way because you tell the story of your high school teacher and how powerful she was in leading you to kind of like move away from Wallflower and find your voice. And just kind of curious as, someone I'm sure who's asked to come and, speak to young people. What do you think?
Actually, I was I visited a middle school today to talk about Islamophobia, talking about our identities, how do we interact, how do we react to these things, and I was invited by the students, which I was kind of shocked to hear that middle schoolers were listening to my podcast because it's very like tough content. But that's the world we live in. Like that's where we're at. People are dying to hear stories that like reflect their reality, truths that like people don't want to talk about, maybe too taboo, culturally taboo and uncomfortable. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we can just ignore them because we're not ready, And so I would even argue having it earlier than high school. I would argue with having it. I mean, I was Wallflower as early as I could remember. And although I met Glenn in high school, I would have loved to have been challenged that way earlier on, and so I could have spent more time getting to know myself in the way that I needed to. Maybe I would have started TDS a lot earlier. I might have started out in high school. I might have taken more time. I might have enjoyed my experiences. I might have challenged myself so much more. In so many ways, I always feel kind of late to the party. But I mean, those notions is sometimes I think about, but other times I realize maybe I'm just right on time. But I will say that giving challenging young people to see themselves, to own their stories, to recognize what their stories are and what they say, and telling them they're important, can really transform how they participate online, and the things they interact with, and the things they reshare, and the things they promote, right? There's a lot of issues in there. There's scary areas in the digital world. There are young people are being accessible at a very early age. If we don't counter them, then how are they able to safely browse? How are they able safely to ingest these content? And then what are we to do if they fall trapped to it, right? And so I only learned the internet at 12, right? And now people have iPads as young as 6. So like it's a necessity. It's not even an option anymore. It's not even not on the table. It has to be on the table for online literacy that way.
Well, it makes me think when I was coming up, it was media literacy. So I was able to do media literacy in class in high school. But the big concern was too much TV. This was like for my generation, the big concern. But something my mom always did that I hated, but I think it was the right thing, is she'd always say, "What are you watching? And let's talk about it." And like, I hated it. She'd come in when Degrassi was on. I'm talking the original Degrassi, and I'd be like, pregnancy, but that is the right thing to do. And I think too often parents or aunties like me are a bit like, I don't even understand this, or like Minecraft is boring, but actually it's having the conversations rather than pretending it doesn't exist, or just like banning it, or say not to your older, to opening up those conversations, I think benefit everyone who's involved, which leads me to the next question. And Alexander, we're going to send it your way. Which is from Paul. Any thoughts on how different generations have different perspectives on digital citizenship and their online presence?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Paul. I think for me, I don't know. I wonder if there is actually, I think there's differing levels of fluency. I think we've kind of spoken a little bit, just now around how different people have engaged in digital platforms at different points in their lives. I think at the end of the day, though, I think it's really important, at least for me, I think that we don't see digital citizenship or digital places and platforms as somehow separate from, all forms of citizenship. And I think when we see digital spaces as just another space where we're occupying, I think across generations, I think we're looking for the same things, and we're hoping to, find community and find connection. But then we also run the risk, as we do in any space, of also causing harm. And so I think for me, it's rather than trying to divide generations or suggest that younger folks have engaged better or differently than older generations. I think it's really important for us to really look at what are the things that connect us, and what are the ways in which we can really leverage digital spaces to connect us across generations, and actually be a space where we can come together and engage meaningfully around some of the pressing issues that we face.
Well, it's such an important point. I also think we have to humble ourselves because the technology is always changing. So it's quite often new to all ages and generations at the rate of development. Question from Tracy that I'd like to ask of each of you. If there's one line that you could share today, especially with young people, what would it be? So, Kara, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, that's a good question. I mean, I would say, and this is coming from the work that we do with young Canadians, it's that, your voice matters and you have a right to be heard and a right to engage in online spaces, and that there are resources and supports for you. And I say that because we hear often from young people that they have this sense that they're engaging in an adult world and that they're constantly coming up against adult invented problems, and that feels insurmountable to them sometimes and can lead to them shutting down, especially when it comes to things like intervening in online hate. So I would just say, your voice matters. You have a right to be in these spaces. You have a right to feel safe in these spaces, and to reach out to folks in community who would love to be there and support you in doing that.
Cadar, what would you say?
That. I would co-sign everything Kara said, and I would also add someone that told me that, and I really like this advice, was that difficulty, hardship, struggle are portals of discovery. You choose them to be. Our experiences are always not going to be so great, but we have the choice of how we deal with them and what we learn from them. And they're really great opportunities of self-discovery if you decide. So yeah, that'd be mine.
Thank you. Alexander.
Yeah, echoing both of my panelists there. I think I would say, stand tall and take care. Stand true in your identity, stand true in your voice, but also take care, and that these spaces, do have the ability to cause harm, and to feel that you have the ability to step back when you need to rest, to find connection, human connection points or connection to Mother Earth in ways and places that exist beyond our devices, and that that is okay as well. That we don't need to be constantly connected, and it's important to resource ourselves as well in these times.
One of the themes I've taken away from our conversation tonight is the narrative shift, and Cadar, is someone who is so real and authentic. What advice do you have for someone who wants to change the narrative online and use their voice to do so? How does one start?
By owning it, by doing it in real life, being it in real life, and being authentic. Be authentic, for the love of God. Be authentic. Don't mimic anybody else. We don't need mimics. We need diversity. Be as diverse. Be real. And I think you will be so surprised how many people will rally around you because of that authenticity. And so the narrative starts with you, and owning it, and then sharing it. What is your narrative?
Back to the power of the sharing and the community that comes with that. Well, we're going to leave it there. That's a perfect note to end on. So thank you again to our talkers, Brisson-Boivin, Alexander Dirksen, and Cadar Mohamud. it's just been such an enlightening conversation. And thanks to our audience at home. If you enjoy today's event, we have more coming up. We are in our fall season, and we hope that you're able to join us on Wednesday, November 9th for the Walrus Talks at Home, Veteran Identities. This is presented by the National Association of Federal Retirees. On Tuesday, November 29th, we're going to be in Toronto for the Walrus Talks Advancing Work. This is presented by TD Bank Group. And we have both in-person tickets for that one, but also a live stream. So if you want to take a look at the upcoming Walrus Talks and Walrus Talks at Home, just stop by our website, thewalrus.ca/events. You'll find our schedule, links to registration. Also, the videos from tonight and all of our events can be found in the Walrus Talks video room. And that's a great resource to be able to share, whether you're educators or you like what you heard and want to pass it on to your network. Also, keep an eye on your inbox. You are going to receive a follow-up email to tonight's event, and that is the best way to stay in touch with us at the Walrus. Just opt into our newsletter so we can keep you up to date with what we're working on. We like to say that the Walrus is a unique beast because we are a registered charity that produces award-winning journalism, events, and podcasts. And we do that with the support of our community of support. So if you enjoyed this free event, consider making a donation online at thewalrus.ca. All gifts of $20 or more will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks again to Media Smarts and Meta for supporting this event. I thank you to our annual sponsors as well, Air Canada, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, and Shaw. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us and really taking some time to think about what it means to be a digital citizen. And I hope we all carry on and realize that there isn't this online, offline life. It's all together. And citizenship is really what we all make it. And I'm excited to see that evolve and get better and stronger. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech. Have a great evening.